opening statement for the record. And Senator Moran is on his way, so we will give him the option when he gets here of either submitting for the record or speaking, but that will allow us to move to questions hopefully before we get to the votes that are being called. So with that, Secretary Raimondo, I will turn the microphone over to you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you, Chair Shaheen, for this opportunity, and to the members of the committee. The priorities funded in this budget build upon the investments that you...
Excuse me, Madam Secretary, maybe you could pull the microphone a little closer so that everyone can hear better.
Sorry. Is this better? Yes. Much better. Sorry, I apologize. Okay, so as I was saying, the priorities funded in the budget build upon the investments that you all enacted in fiscal year 22. And I will say I'm so very grateful for your support as we look forward to accomplishing even more in 23. The budget request includes $11.7 billion for the department, which is an 18% increase above fiscal 22 enacted. And I would just like to go through the 6 key priorities and areas of investment that comprise the $11.7 billion. First, the President's budget strengthens the nation's supply chains by investing in domestic manufacturing. Specifically, it calls $1.46 billion to support the work of NIST, including $275 million for NIST's Manufacturing Extension Program, MEP, and $97 million to expand NIST's role in Manufacturing USA. This, as you all know, will help small and medium-sized manufacturers improve their competitiveness. The budget also proposes $16 million to augment the Commerce Department's data tools and expertise to support more secure and diversified supply chains. Second, the budget positions us to compete globally, protect our national security, and continue to lead a global coalition united in condemnation of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Specifically, it calls for $630 million for ITA to enhance commercial diplomacy. It provides BIS $200 million to apply and enforce export controls and strengthen efforts to counter new threats from Russia and China. Third, the budget invests in equitable and inclusive economic growth for all Americans. I believe that America's greatest strength and core to our competitive advantage is our diversity. Accordingly, the budget proposes $500 million for the EDA to help communities experiencing economic distress take control of their future and position themselves for future prosperity. It also proposes $110 million for the Minority Business Development Agency, which will meet the full authorization that was included in the bipartisan infrastructure law. And very importantly, for those of you representing rural states, part of this funding will be used to open new regional offices and establish rural business centers. Fourth, the business takes historic action to combat the climate crisis. It includes $7 billion for NOAA to continue providing data, strategies, and expertise necessary to address the climate crisis. The request also supports programs to catalyze wind energy, restore habitats, protect oceans and coasts, and improve NOAA's ability to predict extreme weather associated with climate change. An area that I know is of interest to this committee, the budget also proposes $87 million for the Office of Space Commerce. This is a significant increase, and this increase in funding will be dedicated to standing up civil operational space situational capability at NOAA. Fifth, the budget expands opportunity and discovery through data. Timely data is crucial to supporting American competitiveness, innovation, and growth. The budget provides the Census Bureau with $1.5 billion to continue its transformation to a 21st century data-centric model. It also calls for $141 million for the Bureau of Economic Analysis to support new data on the supply chain, income distribution statistics, and the growth in space commerce. Sixth and finally, The budget ensures that the department can provide 21st century service to the American people. It proposes new funds to enhance our own cybersecurity and increase the diversity and equity of our own workforce. Before concluding on this budget, I would be remiss if I didn't take just a second to thank you for the $22 million that you provided to the BIS in the Ukrainian supplemental to implement and enforce the increased export controls on Russia, and I'd be happy to talk about that today. And I would also be remiss if I didn't thank you for your work to advance the USICA Act. I cannot emphasize enough the urgency with which we must move to pass USICA. And I will tell you that I and my team are fully and totally committed to do anything that we can to assist you as you get that critical piece of legislation to the President's desk. The Commerce Department has key priorities in the bill, including the tech hubs, supply chain authorities, and the CHIPS funding. And I will say chip manufacturers have made clear that they are going to build new chip facilities. The question is, will they be built in the United States of America? And the answer will depend on how quickly we can move forward with the USICA bill. So I'm delighted to be here and, of course, happy to take all of your questions.
Well, thank you very much. Again, when Senator Moran arrives, we will go to him, but in the meantime, we will open for questions based on order of arrival, 5-minute question rounds. And I want to begin where you concluded, which is talking about the action to impose export controls on Russia and Belarus in response to their invasion in Ukraine. And I know that we provided funding earlier this year in the supplemental to help do that, but can you speak to the scope of these efforts, how they're progressing, if you see any signs that it's having an impact, and then also what are the needs of the department as we go forward, recognizing that the situation is going to be changing?
Yes,
and we need to make sure you have the resources you need.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. So as it relates to the scope is unprecedented. It is broader than anything the United States has ever done insofar with respect to export controls. Insofar as the United States, the Department of Commerce, led a coalition of 37 other countries to join us in aligning our export controls. And our approach was to deny Russia technology that would cripple their ability to continue a military operation. And that is exactly what we are doing. U.S. exports of technology to Russia have fallen by nearly 70% since we imposed these export controls. And you're starting to see it. You see 2 tank manufacturing facilities have shut. Lada, the auto manufacturer, has furloughed workers and closed down. We have had reports. I met a few weeks ago with the Prime Minister, and we have reports from Ukrainians that when they find Russian equipment, military equipment, on the ground, it's filled with semiconductors that they took out of dishwashers and refrigerators. And so the point is, we are having a very serious effect. What we need to do in order to continue this is enforcement. As I said, thank you for the resources. We'll be back to you if we think we need more. I would just say I'm extremely proud of the team, and I am deadly serious about enforcing and have been crystal clear, particularly with China, that we won't tolerate any circumvention of these export controls.
I'm delighted to hear that, and so pleased to hear also that you're seeing the impact already of what we're doing. Senator Moran, just so you're up to date on where we are, because of the votes, I submitted my statement for the record, so we...
No peer pressure, but I'll do the same.
So I was going to go ahead and finish my questions and then turn it over to you for either statement or to start your questioning, whichever you prefer.
Thank you.
I want to go to another issue that I recognize you don't have control over, but I do think you have an important voice in this discussion, and That is the increasing challenges that we are having in New Hampshire, in particular industries around workforce. It's a general challenge throughout the state, but when it comes to our seasonal businesses, the tourism industry, they are facing severe workforce challenges, and a key reason for that is because of the lack of sufficient H-2B visas being available to them. And I had the opportunity to ask Secretary Mayorkas about this issue last week, and he said that they're moving in the Department of Homeland Security with, he used the term lightning speed. Now, I have to say that's a disturbing characterization of what has been an alarmingly slow process. And I'm just, tell me what we can do to speed this along. How can your agency help us as we try and support those businesses that are really desperate for workers? And, you know, we've lost 2 seasons because of the pandemic. Our season starts on Memorial Day. I know you know this because you were governor of Rhode Island, so you were dealing with these same issues. What can we do to move this debate?
Yeah. So first of all, I appreciate you bringing it up. As you say, Rhode Island is heavily, heavily dependent on tourism, particularly in the summer. These businesses make all of their living between Memorial Day and Labor Day, and they are utterly reliant on the visas, short-term visas, work visas, student visas. So I sympathize with where you're coming from. As you mentioned, Mayorkas, he and Walsh temporarily increased the visas, 35,000 additional. I will tell you, I convened the TTAB, the Travel and Tourism Advisory Board, and I heard an earful from industry that we need to do more, we need to go faster, and we should consider a statutory increase on the cap. So what I am doing and what I will continue to do, even more so at your urging, is make sure the voices of industry are heard in the administration, that we do go faster, but also we ought to think about longer-term solutions.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that and look forward to working on those longer-term solutions. Senator Moran.
Chairwoman, I would ask unanimous consent that my opening statement be made a part of the record.
Without objection.
And, Madam Chairman, I would yield to the senator from Alaska so that you and I can spend time and figure out who's going to be chairing when the votes actually occur.
Very good point. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Senator Moran. Appreciate that. Madam Secretary, welcome. Good to see you. I want to start my questions with fisheries surveys. You know, I always want to talk about fish first. As you are well aware, we're still trying to address this mismatch between survey coverage and the stocks that NOAA is trying to quantify. Going forward, more funding is going to be needed to maintain both the historic survey coverage in Alaska and support new survey missions within the North Bering Sea and even the Arctic. But I want to thank you and NOAA for the work that you have done to prioritize fisheries surveys in the Bering Sea and in the Gulf, and I would ask that you keep us updated on any challenges that you may be encountering with regards to this year's survey plan. We had one vessel, the Oscar Dyson, that was held back a little bit, but you know full well we've had the opportunity to discuss what happens when we have that gap, those gaps in data. Lost surveys are more harmful than ever as we're seeing these changes in our marine environment. We missed a year of crab data in 2020, and then next year, the Bristol Bay Red King crab fishery was closed for the first time in decades. And believe me, I'm hearing from fishermen and managers on this issue. Can you share with me what resources NOAA needs in either manned or unmanned technology to really help us bring this data in a more reliable way so that we can work to address these challenges that we're seeing with the resources in our oceans due to the impact from climate?
Yes, thank you. We have talked about this, and I have to say, even listening to you, it's tough to hear because slow data, lack of data, I know affects people's livelihoods. The budget calls for $3.3 million for additional resources into the surveys, and we believe that this will help us significantly to, with our data collection, with the speed with which we do it, with the continued modernization with which we do the work. You mentioned uncrewed. We are very definitely looking at that, and I think that the team thinks that has great potential in the future. Another thing that we are doing, as you know, we have had mechanical issues with vessels. And while it's tough to predict these things, what we've instituted now is a kind of a proactive maintenance review of the vessels in an effort to prevent maintenance failures of the vessels, which is what has happened in the past. So I guess what I can tell you is the investment of the millions of dollars should help. We're committed to it, and I would just ask that we stay in close contact so that I can continue to, do what I can to manage the team.
Well, we will certainly let you know where those issues are arising. I want to shift now to broadband. We had the opportunity in the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs last week to be able to inquire a little bit more from some of your team on the tribal broadband connectivity program. We were looking for a little more granularity on the program funding levels. And so today I would ask for your input here with when you combine the previous appropriations as well as the bipartisan infrastructure law. We've got available funding for the TBCP at about $3 billion. We also understand that the subscription rate is well above $5 billion. So what I was hoping to get last week and what I'd ask for your help today is more details on this difference here between what we have made available and then really what that need is, what that subscription rate is. And when you look at redundant applications that have come in and then the non-qualifying applications, how does this all factor out? So in this year's budget, you've asked for about another $1 billion, but what I'm hoping to understand is how you came to this $1 billion figure. Is it really going to cover the difference that we see then between, after you take into account the non-qualifying applications, the redundant applications, is this a space where we think we're actually going to be addressing the need?
Okay. I tried to capture all that. I will follow up with your team to get into the details. I think the answer is yes, but I do want to clarify something which is very important. The final allocation for Alaska, for all of your states, cannot be made until we have the FCC maps.
And we've talked about those, yeah.
So, the FCC is starting to collect data to go into the maps June 30th, and they're forecasting possibly November for the maps. So I guess what I'm trying to say is our intention is to make sure that every state gets enough money so that everyone is covered. And if you have a large unserved population, as you currently do, you will receive, more money through the formula, and the intention would be that you would, receive enough. Also, the program includes a 10% set aside for high-cost locations, and I have to believe that given your geography, it would be a high-cost location. So, in any event, I'll follow up specifically, but we are very committed to making sure everyone who's not now served gets served.
Thank you for your responsiveness. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. Senator Feinstein.
Thanks very much, Madam Chairman, and welcome. As you are aware, job growth has been excellent. However, the public, I think, is more focused on inflation, which has been at the highest level since the 1980s. And much of this has been brought on by dynamics the administration can't solve in the short run, such as the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the global supply chain crisis, etc. There's been some debate about whether reducing the substantial tariffs the Trump administration put into place would reduce inflation. But whether or not tariffs cause inflation, they significantly raise prices on U.S. families and businesses. So even if tariffs are not inflation per se, they similarly impact on people's finances. I think there may be cases where tariffs can make sense. However, the costs we impose are mostly borne by U.S. businesses and families. Reducing them would leave people more resources to deal with rising prices. If so, what is the administration's plan to reduce the burden of tariffs?
Thank you for the question.
I'm sorry, I can't.
Thank you for the question. Let me say, since I have been Commerce Secretary, we have been able to eliminate the Trump 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum from the EU, Japan, and the UK. And I have heard from industries that consume steel and aluminum that this has been a benefit. What the president has said with respect to the 301 tariffs, the China tariffs, is that we don't believe that Trump's process was strategic. And so, as the president said yesterday, we right now, as a team, are in the middle of an evaluation of those 301 tariffs to see, whether any changes might be warranted. Obviously, it's the USTR that leads in that effort, but the president has been clear we need to look at every single tool in our toolbox to fight inflation. It's the number one priority, and so we are looking at it holistically.
So it is not inconceivable that you could reduce tariffs, is that right?
It is not inconceivable, right?
How positive might the thought be?
I can't say, and I don't want to get out. Again, I would defer to the White House and USTR, but we've been clear, the president's been clear that the Trump tariffs imposed on China were not done in a thoughtful way. And so we are, as a team, taking a look at it and considering a more strategic approach.
Thank you very much. And I might follow up in writing, and perhaps you can inform us with what you do. I would appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Feinstein. Senator Moran.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and Secretary, welcome. Thank you for the conversation we had when you were working and I was working on Saturday morning last. I want to talk about a pilot program, not a pilot program, but a program for pilots. Congress provided appropriations in the FY22 omnibus bill to sustain an aviation ascension training program as authorized in the NOAA Commissioner Officer Corps Amendment Act. Okay. So Congress authorized a pilot training program for NOAA. What we're really talking about is hurricane hunters, that type of pilot. Last fall, I had the opportunity to have Rear Admiral Hahn and the K-State Salina Dean Starkey. They signed a memorandum of understanding to create a unique program involving those two entities to train pilots. This partnership leverages some existing experience while ensuring a pipeline for NOAA to have pilots. NOAA has relayed that they are currently working on establishing guidelines and regulations to move this program forward. I'm not certain that you would know about this program, but I'm asking you, would you share with me when these will be established, allowing this memorandum of understanding between NOAA and K-State Salina to move forward? And if you don't know about it, the purpose of my question is to give you the chance to get acquainted with this topic.
Exactly, to get you an answer, which I will do by the end of the day. I don't have an answer. I'm familiar. I've been in a hurricane hunter, and I can tell you we do need help upgrading and getting new ones. But with respect to this training program, I have to get you a proper answer.
The Commerce Committee, the Senate Commerce Committee worked with me to get legislation to increase the pipeline of pilots, which there is a tremendous shortage everywhere, but evident at NOAA and hugely important. Let me ask an anti-circumvention inquiry. I think we've had a conversation, and several of us have introduced legislation and written you about what's going on in the solar panel industry.
Yes.
I won't go into the description of the problem, but why is there no industry-supported threshold to initiate this anti-circumvention inquiry? Would legislation be helpful? When I've asked you this question, I think the answer has been our hands are tied. And I'm trying to figure out how to untie your hands, because there is a process, at least on solar panels, that's being utilized to keep tariffs in place to the detriment of the industry by one small company who made the claim. Should a small single company without access to confidential information actually provided necessary data to meet the statutory requirements to initiate the inquiry? So I'm suggesting to you that the department may have an opportunity to deny this kind of inquiry. Specifically, did the Department of Commerce staff make a finding, also required by the statute, that the investigation itself met the appropriateness criteria? So there's criteria in statute. Did the department meet that? Did the department make the finding that the company met that criteria? And if the answer is yes, then what more can we do to keep this kind of thing from occurring, which I think is pretty darn damaging to businesses in the United States?
Yeah. Okay, there was a lot in that, and I'll do my best in a minute. First of all, I've heard from many of you and many in the industry, and I share the sense of urgency. I understand how fragile the solar supply chain is and how we need to move forward quickly. Having said that, as you well know, Senator, this particular statute, which we are obligated to implement, is very circumscribed. There are 5 criteria, and 5 criteria only, that ITA can look at in deciding whether to initiate. And if they find that the case meets the criteria of the threshold of the 5 criteria, we are obliged to initiate, which is what we are doing. And we're going to move as fast as we can. Having said that, I have been asked, why don't you consider climate as a factor? Why don't you consider policy as a factor? Why don't you consider the disruption to the supply chain as a factor? The answer is, statutorily, there is no discretion. So the answer to your question, could you help? That's, of course, your decision. But were you to institute some discretion, then we could implement it according to those changes.
I would ask you if the department would like to work with us to provide some legislative suggestions that might address the discretion, or at least create greater list of criteria for the decision to be made on. And then I would ask you to make certain that the findings that are required by the statute have actually been met in this solar panel circumstance. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Reid.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Let me just follow up briefly on Senator Moran's question, which is important now, because there's been a lot of rhetoric suggesting that this is an indication of the administration's lack of support for a green economy, for alternate energy. As I understand it, and you can confirm it, Madam Secretary, that the President is proposing the most ambitious climate package in the history of the United States, with $555 billion in tax cuts, spending, and other incentives to promote wind, solar, power, and other renewables. And I believe that's accurate. Can you confirm that?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. And you're strongly supportive of this effort.
Yes.
And so I am also, not only from the perspective of the economy, but also national security, as a witnessing now, if we weren't as reliant on hydrocarbons, we would have much more leverage in many places that we need it. So thank you. You've answered, I think, in detail the particular and important question Senator Moran asked, and I think that answer stands.
Yes,
Thank you very
you.
much. One other area that we're concerned about, and again, it comes from national security perspective. The President was down in Alabama at the factory manufacturing Javelin missile systems, and one of the issues that came up is the lack of semiconductors. But again, from my chairmanship on the Armed Services Committee, practically every system we have in the military today has a microchip somewhere in it. And I presume, and you can confirm, that the lack of domestic supply or a reliable supply from an ally is a great concern to the administration as it is to the contractors.
Absolutely. I hear regularly from contractors that chips are a rate limiting factor for their ability over time to continue to replenish. There are just over 200 chips in every Javelin launching system. There are hundreds of chips in every satellite, and on and on. And even more worrisome, the most sophisticated chips, of which we make none in the United States and are totally dependent on Taiwan for, are exactly the kind of chips that are needed in sophisticated military equipment, which is why, in my opening statement, I am saying to the committee, I really believe it's time to take action on this, because I have also heard, Senator, from semiconductor companies who tell me they are going to expand their facilities, and they have to make those decisions this year in order to meet the demand. Germany, Singapore, Taiwan, Japan, Spain, France are all putting huge subsidies in front of these companies, and if we don't pass this USICA bill this year, they'll have no other choice but to build overseas, which does us no good.
Well, thank you. I have the same observations from the perspective not only of the economy, but I suggested of national security. One issue that is a little close to home is that we've been working closely with NOAA about infrastructure at Newport, which would support their operations in a much more efficient way than currently they conduct them. We're 100% designed, but we have to get into the next phase, and I would ask if you could look at that, and any support would be deeply appreciated. Yes,
absolutely. I've talked to you about it. I, of all people, know how important it is to the state, and we're going to work with you.
And then, excuse me, we talked about semiconductors, and we also talked about alternate energy, and one of the areas where you have very personal experience is offshore wind. And do you think that NOAA and BOEM have the tools they need to maintain and indeed accelerate the pace of offshore wind being deployed?
It's an excellent question. I think yes, I think is the answer, although I will go back and ask if we need more tools. We need to do a better job of accelerating the permitting process. I think we have the tools. I think we need to continue to increase our sense of urgency and, frankly, kind of just break down the bureaucracy between BOEM at the Department of Interior and NOAA. Mm-hmm. And that is what we are doing. In fact, Janet Coit, who ran DEM for me in Rhode Island, has come here. She's head of Fisheries, and that's what we're doing. We've executed an MOU as between Interior and Commerce, and it's just a constant pushing to make sure we move more quickly.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Reid. Senator Hagerty, I'm told that you were here at the gavel before you left, so you are next.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And Secretary, it's good to have you here. I'd like to just follow up on the discussion you had with Senator Reid for a brief moment. You and I have talked about this before, but every member in this committee and every senator here has actually supported a piece of legislation that's essentially a fast-track permitting process for chip fabrication facilities here in America. It takes roughly a 5-year program, 5-year permitting process down to about 18 months. So I would encourage and appreciate any help from the department as well, getting support in the House to move this through. I think it fits right in line with what you're talking about from a strategic standpoint.
Yes, I'd be happy to work with you on that. It is an issue. I mean, these facilities, permitting often holds them up for 1-2 years at a time.
I think we're very aligned on that. I'd like to turn just a minute to talk about the Census, excuse me. It's a function that's required, by the Constitution. In looking at the 2020 census, there are a lot of questions about the statistical methods and the assumptions that are used to supplement the actual data that's collected. There are methods like group quarters imputation or differential privacy that are employed. I'm not sure if you're familiar with these methodologies.
Somewhat. I mean, obviously, I am not a statistician, but somewhat.
Yeah, I'm like you, somewhat familiar with. I understand the principles of them, but it seems to me that the employees at the Department of the Census are really the only ones that fully understand and appreciate the assumptions, the models, what goes into them, and they're the ones that are actually charged with looking at the actual numbers, making adjustments, changing the numbers, and coming up with the final report. I just feel the American public, certainly the Congress, would be well served to have a little more oversight and more visibility into what those methods are and how they're being deployed. And I wanted to bring this up to you, if you could be supportive of perhaps putting in place a bipartisan panel that would overlook the way the census is conducted, the methodologies. Again, this should be a nonpartisan issue, I think, for us, and a bipartisan panel has been done before. It strikes me this may be a way to get some more transparency and oversight in place.
You know, this is the first I'm hearing of it, but I'm open to following up with you. What I can tell you is I have set the tone at the top of the Commerce Department that the Census Bureau should be fact-based, data-based, science-based, statistical-based. And Rob Santos, who is the new census head, has a strong statistical background. And I believe that, I feel confident that that is the way he is running the department. Having said that, you know, more transparency is always better.
I'll provide a few more questions for the record on that, but I look forward to working with you in that regard. And I appreciate the chair's perhaps having an oversight meeting soon about what the census is doing. It'd be great to get that on our agenda. The next place I'd like to turn has to do with our competitiveness in the Indo-Pacific, and I know you've spent a good deal of time on that. Our economic leadership in that region, I think, is terribly important for our national security interest. It's important for good jobs here in America. As a former governor, you appreciate that, I'm certain, very much. I just led a bipartisan delegation to Japan a couple of weeks ago, worked very closely with my successor, Ambassador Rahm Emanuel. We visited with the Prime Minister, with his cabinet, with a number of business leaders. And in all of those meetings, it was clear to me that it's as important as ever that we continue to find ways to deepen our economic ties in the region, particularly given what's happening with the Chinese Communist Party, their aggressive posture, whether it be from a diplomatic standpoint, a military standpoint, and certainly from an economic standpoint. We see the Chinese Communist Party moving in every direction in that region. Also, when I served as ambassador, prior to Ambassador Emanuel, I worked very hard to put in place a trade agreement between the United States and Japan that helped deepen our agricultural ties, helped deepen our industrial ties, and importantly, it had an element in it of digital trade, a high-standard digital trade component to it that I think could serve as a model for the broader region. And I would look forward to working with you on that to get your thoughts on how that might be rolled out. I've discussed this with Ambassador Emanuel, and I think it holds some real promise. My first question for you specifically is, under the aegis of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework that's been discussed heavily, and I think it will be discussed much more as President Biden visits the region, what are your plans to advance our economic leadership in the region?
Yeah. So a few things. One, I agree with everything you've said, and I'd be happy to follow up. I have already been to Tokyo once. The president will be there next week. We can't do enough to shore up our economic presence in the region. The good news is, by the way, Emmanuel Rahm has me on speed dial. We talk several times a week. We are digital, supply chain, aligning on export controls, investments. There's a lot there. There's a lot there. If you think about semiconductor export controls, there's only 3 countries that have tool makers, the U.S., Japan, and the Netherlands. So if we could align on that, it could be incredible. I'm one of the co-leads, along with Ambassador Tai, on the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. In fact, I met this morning with the Prime Minister of Vietnam to get them on board. I hosted Minister Hagiuda last week because he's my counterpart, and we're kicking off an economic dialogue as between our Commerce Department and METI. So, you know, time doesn't permit here, but suffice it to say, this is a top priority of mine. I share your prioritization and, frankly, your concern. We need an economic strategy there, but frankly, we also need to be a counterweight to China.
Indeed. And I think there's great potential. I've watched with great interest what you're doing with the US-EU Technology Council. I would encourage you to look at Japan perhaps as a way to continue to find means of agreement and cooperation there. And if there are any things that you need from this committee to support that, please let us know.
Great.
Thank you, Secretary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Schatz.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to just make sure we have a meeting of the minds on this solar holdup. I want to know that you are alarmed, and I want to know that you are going to update the members of the Senate who have expressed their concerns on a bipartisan basis with some pace, maybe weekly. Either you or an assignee can communicate with us about where we are in the process. So first, are you alarmed? And second, will you communicate with us regularly on where we are?
So I would say yes and yes. You know, as I said to one of your other colleagues, we have to move forward quickly to meet our climate goals. But as I also said to Senator Moran, there's a process, there's a law. I have to implement the law.
Yeah, I got it. And I want to, look, I don't want to get into an argument with you about the law. I will say that this 5-part test in the statute it has to meet all 5 parts. And I would argue that the allegation that what's happening in terms of the manufacturing process in Southeast Asia is minor or insignificant is just facially not true. And if you can't go through a fact-finding process on the front end, then you're stuck essentially having to open up an investigation and grind an entire industry to a halt while you do your fact-finding. So that's one point I'd like to make. But the crux of this is Commerce has already asked and answered the critical question here, which is that what's happening in Southeast Asia is not minor or insignificant. It's affirmed this in multiple scope rulings, March 2012, October 2020, June 2021, that adding a positive-negative junction is a highly technical production process, and I know you're not looking at revisiting the question of whether turning a wafer into a cell is minor or insignificant. So first of all, are we in agreement about that?
So let me say this. I am not involved. We are sitting as essentially a judge, quasi-judicial capacity, and it's the professionals at ITA who are going through this analysis. So as I said earlier, I personally I don't have discretion or ability to weigh in on their fact-finding process.
Well,
but I would be happy to have you, and you know, we're not permitted even to talk about this extensively, but I'd be happy, I suppose, to let you speak to them with counsel on the phone if that would be useful.
A couple of things. First, the administrative authority in the statute is the secretary, right? So it's not like assigned to some independent panel of civil service professionals. That authority is vested in you, and there's nothing inappropriate about you being more engaged in the process. They may not like that, but and I get that you don't get to weigh climate goals or public policy or anything else. But what I'm saying is the thing that was alleged is just facially not true, and the manufacturing process that is occurring in Southeast Asia is not minor or insignificant because the Commerce Department has already decided that. So now the only thing that the Commerce Department is in a position to make a determination on is the thing that's happening in Southeast Asia actually what's happening in Southeast Asia? Like, can you just confirm that turning wafers into cells is what's happening? And my worry is that although the statute reads you have 150 days to come to a preliminary determination and then I think either another 300 days or a total of 300 days, those are not statutory minimum numbers of days. That's a maximum. Mm-hmm. And so what I want for you to contemplate is that you do have the discretion to get a little more personally engaged. It doesn't jeopardize the independence of the investigation. Informing Congress as to the status of it also is not in any way improper. And finally, that we are in a major, major hurry because the solar industry in the United States is at a halt. And I know the pushback you're getting from within the department, and I respect the independence of these civil servants, but the authority is vested in the secretary.
All right, let me respond to this. I hear you. You know, I think it's August 29th or mid-August is the outside limit. There is nothing that prevents us from going faster, and I assure you we are going to go as fast as possible, making sure we tick and tie the process and don't cut corners. But yes, if we can do better than August, we certainly will. Secondly, you know, respectfully, having been a governor and run organizations, I know that this is an urgent matter. I also know how to respect regulators and make sure that they have the freedom to do their job. This is complex, and there are two sides to the story, which is not to say I don't share the urgency, and I am engaged in an appropriate way. But there's a point I do want to make. A lot of the I think Senator Reid said rhetoric or rumor, et cetera, is very focused on, you hear it, you know, a 200% tariff. And I really want to address that for a second, if I might. It is true commerce would be permitted to impose a tariff at that excessive level. That is exceedingly unlikely, which is to say that level of a tariff is only reserved in outside cases where you can't tell the difference between the company and, say, the Communist Party of China. The last 150 times we've done this since 2012, we've come out in the 10, 11, 12% range, under 20%. Now, I am in no way like predetermining what this will be, if it will be anything. I do think it's important, though, to say the 200% is an extreme case and not fitting with the precedent that we've had. But listen, I share your urgency, and I'm happy to update you as regularly as you would like.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Schatz. Senator Collins.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Secretary Raimondo, it's good to see you. I'm going to start by asking you a very quick question on the implementation of the infrastructure's broadband development grants that you, Chairman Shaheen, and I worked so hard on, and that are targeted first for unserved areas and then underserved areas. My question is this: NTIA has until May 16th to publish the notice of funding opportunity for this program, and many states are eagerly awaiting that notice. In my state, the Maine Connectivity Authority stands ready to pursue this transformational assistance. My question is this: will NTIA meet that deadline?
Yes, we will. And there's even a chance we will beat that deadline.
I'm very glad to hear that. Now I'm going to switch to our usual contentious issue, which we discuss, and that is the onerous new regulations on Maine's lobstermen and women. May 1st marked the first day of these implementation of these regulations. It was a dark day for the industry. NOAA denied an entirely reasonable request from the governor, the entire Maine delegation, to delay implementation of the rules, which we do not think are valid in the first place, until July 1st. What is interesting is NOAA's denial of this modest extension was opposed by another federal agency, the Small Business Administration's Office of Advocacy. And here's what the office said. It asserted that NOAA was putting lobstermen and women in, quote, an impossible scenario. And if they are, quote, not granted a short delay of the compliance deadline, they may stand to lose significant amounts of revenue or, in some instances, their entire business. And this is because of supply problems where the gear being mandated by NOAA is simply not available. Now, I know that NOAA's announced a graduated enforcement approach, but that is a very small comfort. The industry estimates it will lose $7 million in lost fishing time that would have been saved by just granting that 2-month extension. each of Maine's more than 4,500 commercial lobstermen and women are small, self-employed business owners. That's why the SBA advocated for them, but NOAA totally ignored what the SBA asked for in reinforcing what the industry, the entire delegation, and the governor also requested. So now we're also hearing that NOAA may impose further regulations on the industry. So how can the industry trust that NOAA's not going to regulate them out of existence, given that the agency has rejected recommendations from the SBA's Office of Advocacy? Not just those of us who represent the state, but an independent office within the SBA, another federal agency.
Yeah. So I appreciate you bringing it up. And as I said last time, I'll say again, I really, truly admire your advocacy on behalf of the lobstermen. I do. I have a bit of good news in this regard, which is that our head of fisheries, Janet Coit, is in weekly, if not daily, contact with the Maine Commissioner, Pat Kelleher, and they've worked hard to find local suppliers of the new kind of gear, including Maine Mold. It's a small company you may know, that they are providing the new gear at an affordable price for the lobster fishers. You say that the graduated enforcement isn't much, but I will assure you that our goal of enforcement is not, we're trying to assist with compliance, and we will be as lenient as we can to assist with compliance instead of a gotcha sort of approach. The final thing I'll say is we're on path to have the $14 million out by the end of June, which should help with the cost for the lobstermen to comply.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Collins. Senator Van Hollen, I'm going to turn the question over to you and ask you to take the gavel so I can go vote, and I'll be right back.
Will do. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Madam Secretary, it is great to see you. I just want to run through a couple of shared priorities to underscore my support for items in the budget to begin with. EDA, we look forward to working with you to make good use of those funds. I can tell you in the state of Baltimore, especially places like state of Maryland, especially cities like Baltimore, they've been very important for economic development purposes. NOAA, lots of important tools like the Digital Coast and Coastal County Snapshot being used by coastal communities in Maryland to identify risks from climate change and prepare for necessary mitigation. And look forward to working with you on the NIST budget, the NOAA budget. NIST, I was pleased to see a large request for the construction research facilities. I know that you and the President are big supporters of what we're working on here in terms of the UCETA bill, the American Competes bill. This is a critical part of that investment, so I'm glad to see it included here, and the budget request for scientific, technical, and research services with respect to NIST and America's role in standard setting. And I'm going to get back to that in 1 second. I do want to say amen, and I will not go over the comments made by my colleagues, Senator Schatz and Senator Moran, with respect to the solar panel issue. This uncertainty is creating havoc. I heard your testimony, but I'll leave it at just seconding their comments. I know you're not responsible for overseeing our travel rules and our visa processing system, but I know that you recognize the great benefit to our economy and commerce of international travel here to the United States. We have huge backlogs in our visa processing offices. I've raised this issue with the State Department and DHS, but since you can look at it from the hat of, the benefit to our economy and not just sort of international relations and only security, I'm going to ask you to go back on that. We can clearly meet our security concerns and our health care concerns and still do a lot better, in my view. So on the issue of our representation on very important but little known, at least to the American public, international standard setting organizations. One of them, as you know, is the ITU. The ITU helps set rules governing, international rules governing control of the internet. And right now, there's a Russian candidate seeking to be the chair of this at a time when we're witnessing, the world's witnessing Putin essentially put Russia on lockdown when it comes to any freedom of the internet. So let me just ask you, Madam Secretary, what is your assessment of where we are in that international, that vote that will be taking place with respect to that very important position?
Yes. I appreciate you bringing this up. It's something not a lot of people talk about, but it's incredibly important. China is showing up more and more aggressively in technical standard setting bodies internationally, and NIST is planning to really reassert ourselves. We are backing a candidate, Doreen Bogdan-Martin, for the ITU. We are putting our all into helping her and supporting her. In fact, I've been myself, I was in Estonia, just trying to shore up support for Doreen. It's a campaign, it's an election. You know, you cannot predict the outcome, but I assure you this, it is a priority of ours, the stakes are high, and I hope we win.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think what we've been, witnessing with Putin's war in Ukraine and his shutdown of all sort of freedom of the press and the internet in Russia should be a reminder to most in the world that we need an open internet. But obviously, there are countries that have an interest in the authoritarian model as well. So I appreciate your focus on this. My last questions relate to the export control restrictions and sanctions to go after Russia's military and key industries. I heard Senator Shaheen ask about that, and I've been following the progress we're making with respect to some of Russia's tank manufacturing and aircraft industry. I know you announced some additional restrictions. My concern here on the financial side has been the need to plug more holes with secondary sanctions, which I don't think we're doing enough of. On this side, I know you're vigilant about it, but I worry about Russia's efforts to use shell companies, especially when they're looking for highly important military technology. Can you talk about what we're doing to make sure that they don't open that back door while we close the front door?
Yeah, it's an awesome question and something we spend a lot of time on, and it's why we're requesting more money for enforcement and agents. Look, what we know now, first of all, Russia has an extensive network. They've been doing this for decades, trying to get around export controls. As far as we can see, there's no systemic backfilling by China, by any particular countries, but we will monitor it. Here's one thing that I take comfort in. Because we've done this multilaterally with 36 other countries, that means we have 37 countries on enforcement, which is unprecedented. And from what we can tell is vastly enhancing our ability to enforce. So it's a vigilance, it's a constant vigilance, but at this point in time, I feel quite confident that we're on top of it. And again, because we're not doing it alone.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your efforts on that. Senator Capito.
Thank you, and welcome, Madam Secretary, and thanks for being here. There have been reports in Reuters and elsewhere that China has been pressuring our U.S. executives, companies, and business groups against the USICA bill. To your knowledge, is there any truth to these reports and the threats that our U.S. companies are receiving from our Chinese emissaries, from the Chinese emissaries?
Yeah, thank you. So, like you, I've seen the reports. There have been more than one report, and it doesn't surprise me at all. China doesn't want us to pass this bill. They know that this bill will enable us to outcompete them. And in the past handful of years, China has invested $160 billion in increasing their own domestic semiconductor production. So the last thing they want is for us to invest $52 billion, which will make us stronger. So yes, I have heard the reports. They're deeply concerning to me. And It just means we have to act. We have to act now. As we said with Senator Reid, it's an issue of national security. And I think if the reason China's so against it is because they know how important it is for us.
Right. Thank you. Would you say the crux of their objections would be that semiconductor portion of it? Because that's going to have the most economic benefits. It does have the most economic.
You know, it's a good question. I don't know. I would say certainly that is what they have explicitly been against. But the rest of it, increases in research and development, the tech hubs, all of it goes to enhancing America's competitiveness.
Right.
And so I think they would probably oppose the whole thing.
Well, as a supporter of that bill, and I'm on that very small conference committee that's meeting tomorrow, so I appreciate that. Today, NOAA has 40 petaflops of supercomputing capability for weather predicting and research. So I looked up petaflop because I have no idea what that is. And for our viewing public, a petaflop is 1,000 million floating point operations per second. Or another way to say it, a quadrillion, which is 1,000 trillion. That's how fast it is. So I'm sure we'll all remember that, but I didn't want to say petaflops without knowing what it was. As you know, NOAA's facility in Fairmont, West Virginia, is one of NOAA's 5 research and development supercomputers. We're very proud of that. In addition, the IIJA provided NOAA with another $80 million for research supercomputing. We've placed a big emphasis on the supercomputing capabilities for a lot of reasons for NOAA. So I'm proud of the work that we do in Fairmont, and I guess could you speak to the vision that you have for supercomputing and how West Virginia may play a role there?
I think West Virginia will play a very important role. And I will say, so in the FY23, we're requesting $20 million in the President's budget to recapitalize and maintain the high-performance computing capacity, and that will enable consistent capacity increases in R&D through computing sites, specifically like the one in West Virginia. In Fairmont. So I think artificial intelligence, high-performance computing, these areas are areas of increasing economics, national security, and climate change. You know, we need this. We're depending on it. We're investing in it, and I can firmly say that Fairmont will stand to benefit from these investments.
Great. Well, we're very pleased to have NOAA there and look forward to further investment. Let me ask back to a quick clarification on a question that Senator Collins asked about the deadline. You know how interested I am in the digital divide. You're probably surprised I didn't start with that. But you mentioned a May 17 deadline. Just so I can clarify for my broadband counsel at home, that's the deadline that you are going to then come forward with a request for proposals, or does the proposal have to be in?
Exactly. So it's May 16th, Monday. It's what the NOFO, so it's the Notice of Funding Opportunity, will go out the 16th, and will be asked, the way it's going to work, you can tell this to your folks, we will ask every state to then apply for the money. All they have to do is submit us an intention to apply, which they should do quickly. Then we'll be sending them a $5 million planning grant, and then we'll get to work right away on the back and forth of putting together the proposal.
Okay, so the planning grant, okay, great news. I did have a question on the supply chain for that's needed to deploy all this broadband, but I'll save that for question for the record, and thank you.
May I say something?
Yes.
You asked me last time I saw you a week or two ago, what happens if RDOF says someone's covered, but they're not covered for 5 years?
All over the place,
The answer is you're counted as unserved until you're actually served.
Really?
Yes. So I wanted to make sure to get back to you.
That's a great clarification. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Senator Braun, I'm turning it over to you, and I'm going to go vote. Thank you.
I guess I'll recognize myself here. So.
It's a little strange.
First time that's occurred in a little over 3 years, but it's the nature of how this place works.
Here we are.
So back on March 15th, I introduced a letter about the labor negotiations with the West Coast folks in terms of having those done by July 1st. I understand they may have started yesterday. So last time there's been a dispute there. It ended up lasting 10 months, and it probably had more latitude in terms of how long you could go. I think that would be devastating for supply chain, everything else we've come through. I was hoping to get your opinion as to whether you think we'll get these negotiations done so that we don't, pass that July 1st deadline.
I'm sorry, which negotiations?
Okay, so it would be the upcoming contract negotiations for the West Coast ports. So it's a labor negotiation.
Okay. Sorry, I am not involved in that, so.
Well, I think I'm raising the point in that, supply chain is
Yes.
part of what
No,
you are concerned
yes.
with. That's been a major bottleneck on supply chain, and I and about 17, 18 other senators put it in a letter to President Biden and really have not heard back, although I am told that they may have started yesterday. So why don't you find out how
fair
they're
enough.
going and to
Yep.
make sure that we don't pass the July 1st threshold, because that would add, right
Yes.
when we're starting to get a little fluidity,
Yes.
back, I guess, from the frying pan into the fire. So I'll discuss something
Yeah.
that we both share a concern with. My business was logistics distribution. I know how supply chains have been really rattled, displaced. Main trading partner for many, the Chinese, have now done some things in their own country that look like they're going to be less dependable when it comes to how it's going to work on key things we get from them. Semiconductors, we know what that's done to many, many different industries. Those are issues I'm hoping that we're going to somewhat reflexively bounce back into something that's going to be more workable. I know you're working on some of the particulars. We've talked about it before, so I won't belabor that. I think what I'm concerned about mostly in our American economy, no one else seems to be, is the fact that the president put out a blueprint on a budget 10 years out that shows us actually growing our structural deficits, taking our debt from 30 trillion, where it is currently, record high in our country's existence, to 45 trillion. Love to know how you view that in terms of being a viable blueprint, and when do we have to start addressing the underlying causes, which are tough issues, Social Security, Medicare, that drive the structural deficits, or whether it makes a difference, whether we can have a blueprint for our country out there that says, hey, we're going to be 45 trillion. That's taking us into territory way exceeding where we were post-World War II.
So I can assure you that the president is concerned about fiscal responsibility. In fact, the deficit shrunk significantly this past year under his leadership, and he'll be the first to tell you that he is for responsible, efficient, run government. But we also think it's important to make investments, like the investments that we made in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, investments in broadband, investments in clean water, et cetera. So I think that, like all things, it is a balance, but I can tell you the president is committed to running a responsible government and fiscal responsibility.
Well, I know he said that. To me, the proof is in the practice and the pudding, so to speak. And pre-COVID, we were borrowing about 23% of every dollar we spend here marginally. Now that's up to 30%, and we created the largest deficits in our country's history, some in a bipartisan way, in trying to navigate through the pandemic. I'd be careful about touting that you're bringing the deficits down, because it's still huge deficits that we created. So the law of gravity would bring you down. What I'm more concerned about is putting a formal blueprint out there that averages between now and then, $1.5 trillion deficits times 10, 15 trillion added to our debt. I don't think it's a business plan that's sustainable. I think politicians, including Jay Powell at the Fed, through whatever this modern monetary theory is supposed to be, I think it runs us into the ditch in a hard way. And I would hope that there might be some modification to our country's business plan that does something other than that. And or do you like, or are you comfortable with a blueprint that shows us being $45 trillion in debt?
I am comfortable with the president's plans, but, you know, I agree with you that we have to continue to work to live within our means.
I guess we'll live with that today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Braun. I think Senator Moran is still coming back, and I have a few more questions. We still have 2 more votes, which could take a while. So since you're here, I get to ask questions. And I want to go back to NOAA because, as you know, last year NOAA required increased observer coverage for the Northeast groundfish fishery, which has been an ongoing challenge for us in New Hampshire as for other groundfish fisheries throughout New England. This year, with NOAA increasing the coverage requirement to 100% from about 40%, every fishing trip is going to have an observer on board, and the program costs are going to significantly increase. So I have been pleased over the last 5 years when we have worked to see that we cover the cost of at-sea monitors for our fishing boats. And I was disappointed this year that the budget request for NOAA actually proposed to cut the funding for this program from the enacted level. So can you talk about that decision, and has NOAA actually estimated the full cost of at-sea monitoring for the 2022 fishing year?
Yes. So first of all, thank you for your support of the at-sea monitoring. It's important. It's important to all the New England states. And yes, they have. I know there has been a cut, but we have $11 million, left over from prior years. So it is our estimation that the 7.6 which we've requested plus the 11 which we have will be adequate.
So will you commit to me that NOAA will cover the full cost of at-sea monitors this year?
That is the plan, yes.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that, and also look forward to seeing how we can help some vessels move to electronic monitoring, which I know there has been some reluctance to do, but I think the more the fishing industry sees what's happening in that area and is able to understand how that would affect them, the more likely they are to be willing to switch over. So I think that is also a significant piece of this.
Yes, I agree. It's Senator Murkowski and I chatted a little bit about the uncrewed. I mean, this all sorts of technology that we need to adopt to make this easier.
Great. Sticking with NOAA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act provides about $3 billion over 5 years for programs for NOAA. And I was very pleased to work to try and ensure that the majority of this funding goes to improve coastal resilience and restoring habitat, something that's very important to us, as you know, in coastal states. And I know that communities are very eager to receive these funds, but it's been almost 6 months since the passage of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, and yet NOAA's only released 2 of at least 10 notices of funding opportunities. So can you talk about what the reasons are for the delay and when communities can expect that they may see more of those funds?
Yes. So, as you say, it was nearly $3 billion, $2.96 billion. That is an unprecedented amount of money for NOAA to have received, which is not an excuse. It's just a reality that it's more than they've ever done. We plan and will have all the notice of funding opportunities out by the end of June. So that is a commitment, end of June.
Great.
And we're just going to work towards it.
And are there ways that we can help alert our communities that these notices are coming and they should be watching for them, and encourage them to be paying attention and seeing how we can help communities?
You know, that is a good question. I'll have my staff follow up with you specifically.
That'd be great.
So I can give you a more specific sense of when New Hampshire, for example, should start looking for it.
That would be really helpful. As you know, one of the things that I've been very impressed with in the seacoast of New Hampshire is the extent to which communities are looking towards the impacts of climate change and getting ready to address that. And so I know these funds are going to be very important as they think about what's coming down the pike. One final question before I turn it over to Senator Moran is, through the CARES Act, the American Rescue Plan, and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, Congress has made historic investments in the Commerce Department as well as many other areas of government and in states to help get through the pandemic. And we may soon pass some form of the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, hopefully, that will add more funding at the department that you're not expecting. And just as with NOAA, that's great news, but it presents challenges for the department. And a lot of us are watching because we are very anxious to see these programs be successful. So can you talk about how you're ensuring that the department is coordinating those investments and what we can do to ensure that you have the support you need to do that?
Yes. Look, like you, I don't want to say anxious about it, but I have a real sense of focus to make sure that we implement all this money correctly. It's over $100 billion, which is an extraordinary amount. I hope you take some confidence in the fact that NTIA, which is implementing almost $50 billion, is going to get that out on time, if not ahead of time. By the way, by this Friday, every state will have a state point of contact for broadband.
That's great.
And I've personally communicated with all the governors. So what's my point? My point is we're gearing up. We are ready. We will implement. We are hiring. I hope you do pass USICA, and that will send $52 billion for CHIPS. And we already have done a lot of the work related to what's the org chart, what kind of talent do we need. So it'll be a partnership between you and this committee and our team, but I want you to have confidence that we know it's a heavy lift and we're prepared.
Great. We look forward to that. I will turn it over to Senator Moran.
Thank you. I don't know as much help to you today, but it was unintentional on my part. Yes. Madam Secretary, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has created new and complex trade challenges. While the administration has requested emergency Ukraine-related funding for the Bureau of Industry and Security, it has not done so for the International Trade Administration. What is the department and ITA doing to promote exports, rural exports in particular, so U.S. farmers can help meet the emerging global food crisis that has arisen as a result of the evil Russian invasion?
So thank you for that question. We are requesting an increase in the president's budget for ITA, and that is specifically for export promotion. And we are there is a team within ITA looking at strategies specifically to respond, as you just said. And with respect to food, there's a great deal of work going on within the administration, in the interagency, around how we can, meet the needs that have been created by the invasion.
Is there money within the budget to help U.S. industries address emerging supply chain challenges and disruptions that have arisen as a result of the war in Ukraine?
Yes, we are requesting $16 million additional for supply chain work. Whether that's specifically for Ukraine, no, is the answer, but it will be used for that. I will say this, that $16 million is what we're asking for to address the existing crisis, the crisis you're referring to, the existing crisis. What this country really needs is what is in USICA, or the whatever we call it, the competition bill, which is a permanent supply chain management operation within the Department of Commerce. If we've learned one thing through COVID, we are woefully under-resourced as it relates to the federal government's ability to map, monitor, manage, and support our supply chain. We've lost 25% of our small manufacturers in the last 25 years, probably many in your state, many in my state. We're one of the only countries, industrialized countries, that doesn't have this. And so that's why I have so much passion for the supply chain portion of the USICA bill. We ought to be continuously monitoring, continuously providing loans and such to small manufacturers, so we're not constantly reacting to these supply chain disasters.
Does that provision exist in either the House or Senate
Yes,
version?
it does, in both.
In both?
In both,
Okay.
yes.
So your testimony is you support that provision that's in those bills?
Strongly.
Okay. And then the Department of Commerce, do you have the capability, and are you doing so, if you do, to engage with U.S. companies that to help them find a role to play in reconstructing Ukraine?
Thank you for that question. So I had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to meet with the Prime Minister. He came to visit with me. We talked mostly about export controls because I was trying to gather information about whether we're being effective. But the conversation quickly turned to the rebuilding of Ukraine. And so the answer to your question is yes, we are already in process engaging the private sector, looking at our own tools within ITA to figure out how we can lean into the rebuilding effort. I will tell you this, we're very early stages. The initial outreach to U.S. industry has been excellent. And I would say more broadly, U.S. private sector has stepped up in ways that have supported the administration's work.
In between voting and the State and Foreign Ops Appropriations Subcommittee that's meeting at the same time today, where the topic is food aid globally, but certainly Ukraine is maybe in need and is a contributing factor, a significant factor in the hunger that's occurring or will occur around the world. One of the answers that Ambassador Beasley provided was that there is no way to truck grain out of Ukraine to world markets. Does that make sense to you? He was responding to someone else's question, and I didn't have a chance to follow up. But the goal, most of that grain is shipped out by ship. Didn't say that very well.
No, I know what you mean. It does make sense to me. Having said that, I would have to look into it further to verify it.
We ought to be, transportation in Ukraine, maybe every industry is important in the rebuilding and the restructuring, but to help meet global hunger, agriculture and transportation seem to me to be of huge importance as you and the private companies that you just mentioned discuss what the next steps are. Those might be the places that are so valuable not only to Ukraine but also to the world.
That's an excellent point.
When we were on the border of Ukraine, the Ukrainians were particularly asking for diesel fuel so that they could actually produce the crops, which captured my attention. It'd be so sad to have crops in a field or seed to plant or crops to harvest, and the absence of diesel fuel prevents them from doing so. Assure me, Madam Secretary, it appears to me that there's, as I would expect, there is significant emphasis in the administration's budget, in your Commerce Department budget, on climate change. Having just been in Kansas a weekend ago and saw the results of a tornado in Andover, assure me that the priorities on climate change do not diminish the necessity or the capabilities of providing the current weather and the warnings necessary and the knowledge necessary for people to protect themselves and for farmers to make decisions about planting and harvesting are we make sure we're not diminishing what we need to do otherwise?
No, in fact, we're expanding what we need to do. In fact, I was just meeting with Dr. Spinrad the other day around what more investments we're making to improve our weather forecasting, improve our wildfire forecasting, and how we can continue to develop data products that we can provide to businesses, to states, to cities, to do an even better job with drought forecasting, which of course leads to fires, et cetera. So, no, I would say if anything, we're doubling down on this. And some of the investments in satellites and such are exactly for that.
Thank you for your answers.
Thank you, Senator Moran. I actually only have one more question, and that has to do with anomalous health incidents. The omnibus budget included a provision that allowed the department to have up to $5 million to assist certain employees and family members who may have been affected by anomalous health incidents. Can you tell us if that funding has been used, if you have, if you think it's going to be adequate to address the concerns that you're hearing from employees, or
Yeah,
do you need additional help?
Permit me to get back to you on that. I have not heard that it is not enough, and I have been in close contact on all of these issues, but I will get back to you and give you a better answer.
That'd be great. Thank you. Senator Moran, do you have any further questions?
No, thank you. I do, but I don't have time for them.
In that case, if there are no further questions, senators have until Wednesday, May 18th, to submit additional questions for the official hearing record, and we would request the department responses within 30 days of any questions for the record. The subcommittee now stands in recess, subject to the call of the chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.